My name is Rachel Rosen, and I am a researcher at MDRC. We are presenting today on our evaluation of the P-TECH 914 schools in New York City. I'm here today with my colleague, Emma Alterman.
Hi, my name is Emma Alterman, and I'm a researcher at MDRC working on the P-TECH 914 evaluation with Rachel Rosen and a team of others as well.
So MDRC has been conducting a 5-year impact and implementation study of the P-TECH 914 schools in New York City. This is a study that's funded by the Institute for Education Sciences and is a collaboration between MDRC, the New York City Department of Education, the Early College Initiative at CUNY, and the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. And today we're going to be presenting our interim findings on this project.
Great, thanks Rachel. We're going to start today's presentation by talking about first, what are P-TECH 914 schools? So P-TECH 914 schools are really a move beyond traditional vocational education. They take together a few of the other models that we already know have been effective. So it takes pieces from the career academies, from small schools, from early college high schools, and puts them together into a new model. So this model is a 6-year program in which students complete their high school degree, their applied associates in a STEM field, as well as complete work-based learning experiences. And those work-based learning experiences are provided by an industry partner. So in New York City, the 3-way partnership that makes this work is between the New York City DOE, CUNY, and an industry partner that altogether they prepare students for college and career. CUNY and the New York City DOE have scaled this to the first 7 schools in New York City that are part of our study. So here we can see those 7 schools. They span 4 of the 5 boroughs in New York City. Each of the schools has a community college partner, a CUNY campus where their students can take their classes. They also have an anchor employer partner. These employer partners provide much of the work-based learning opportunity for students, and we're also at the table to think about things like scope and sequence for the kids at the start of the model. So here is that scope and sequence. We have 3 buckets of work that students participate in throughout their time. It's again that high school, college, and career mix of activities. We'll get into the specific findings in each of these buckets in just a minute, but the important thing to note on this slide is that these 3 buckets of activities are really happening all at the same time rather than in succession. So we will talk about how that impacts student experience in just a minute. First, a quick overview of this evaluation. There are 3 parts to the evaluation: the implementation study, which seeks to understand what this really looks like on the ground, any successes or challenges that folks are having; the impact study, which seeks to explore if the program is having the intended impact on student outcomes; and finally, the cost study, which really looks at the resources that it takes to pull this off. Our interim report and this presentation are focused on the implementation and impact findings that we have so far. So first, we'll talk a little bit about these implementation findings, and we'll start with that first bucket of activities that students experience, the high school experience. P-TECH 914 students, we found, are on an accelerated high school timeline. They have to have time to start engaging with college early. So in order to do that, their high school classes are bumped up a little bit. This is, of course, very tricky. So they are given a robust set of supports to help them with this timeline and help them fit everything in. This includes a lot of advising, as well as some summer bridge programs, which help ease the transition between 8th and 9th grade. The students also participate in a specified CTE pathway. They take at least 4 CTE courses, which we think really demonstrates a depth of CTE experience within this model. And finally, schools provide soft and professional skills instruction. These are things like how to write a resume, how to attend a job fair, It's also things like staying organized, important skills to take students through college and career. So the next bucket of work is the college coursework. As we said, college coursework begins early, and that's largely in 10th grade across the model. They are participating in degree pathways that are designed specifically to complement that CTE coursework that they're doing in the high school part of the model. This college degree and college coursework leads to credentials towards very specific careers. So each high school has their own career path. The college coursework typically begins physically in the high school among other PTech 914 students. And then over time, as students get more in depth in their coursework, the coursework moves to the college campus and they may be taking courses alongside other CUNY students as well. Students can move in and out of college coursework, which means that even if a student has started coursework, they might pause it for a semester or two if they need to go back and finish up some high school requirements, or if they have other needs. This also means that students might start college coursework later than 10th grade. Overall, really the important thing is that the pacing and progress of course taking varies by student, even within school. And all of this is supported by the work of a college liaison. And the college liaison provides support to students regarding both college coursework and also the logistics, things like scheduling. So the final bucket of activities is work-based learning. The work-based learning has a very specific scope and sequence across the schools. They start with exposure and awareness activities in the early years, which is usually things like speakers coming to the school or students going to visit the industry partners' offices. Later, it moves towards career exploration and training, things like job shadowing and particularly internships. The employer partners themselves have a few different reasons why they might want to partner with the PTech 914 school. This could be building a workforce pipeline to their company in particular or their field at large. And some also just want to give back to the community and find this a nice way to do that. Almost all of our PTech schools have employer partners beyond their founding partner to provide even more work-based learning opportunities for students. They're connected to these partners in a variety of ways, largely through school staff, DOE, or CUNY connections. And this is really just to provide more robust experiences for their students. And interestingly, we found that there are no contracts in place between the employer partners and the PTech 914 schools, which makes it a little bit challenging at times to align expectations about what each partner is supposed to be giving and getting. So overall, the big takeaways from the implementation work so far are that we know that none of these elements are necessarily unique to this model, but we really think that the marriage of the three is what makes this the PTech 914 model. The accelerated timing and content of the scope and sequence is really demanding for students. So it needs to be accompanied by really robust supports, which might look different from school to school. And then there's also variation within the school. So two students within the same PTech 914 school might have very different experiences depending on their college course taking and their work-based learning experiences.
Thanks, Emma. That was a really great overview of what's going on in the PTech schools, and I'm going to talk about the impact study. So the impact study that we've been using is a lottery-based randomized control trial. So in New York City, students rank up to 12 high schools that they may want to attend, and then there's an algorithm that places them in their schools of choice. When there are more students who are interested in attending a school than there are seats in that school, it triggers a lottery in the system. So we use that lottery process to evaluate what's going on with students in the PTech schools. So those who are in the program group are those who randomly won a seat in one of the PTech 914 schools, and those in the treatment or comparison group are those who randomly lost an opportunity to sit in one of the P-TECH schools. Something that's important to keep in mind from this is that while there are 7 P-TECH schools that make up our program group or our treatment group, comparison students in this study in our sample were placed into 399 different high schools across New York City, which is almost all high schools in New York City. So when we talk about the impacts and the comparison, it is comparison to experience is in virtually all other New York City high schools. So in this table, we can see different characteristics of students in the P-TECH treatment group and those in the comparison group. The important thing to notice in this slide is that most of the students in our sample, 70% of the students in our sample in both groups were below proficient in 8th grade math and ELA before entering high school. So these were pretty low academically performing students that we have in our sample, and that's something to keep in mind as we talk through the results. So our first set of outcomes that we looked at is the accumulation of high school credits in the New York City DOE. So students are required to earn a certain number of credits in order to graduate high school. And we looked at the number of credits that students were earning by the end of years 1, year 2, and year 3. And we see some interesting patterns. The first is that by the end of year 2, P-TECH students had earned about 1.5 more credits than students in comparison schools overall, and that by the end of year 3, students had earned a total of 2 more credits than students in comparison schools. So by the end of 11th grade, they were 2 credits ahead of students in the comparison group. But what's really interesting about this is that most of that, or virtually all of that credit accumulation is driven by additional coursework in CTE and other types of credits that students were earning in the P-TECH schools. So what we see is that they're earning a lot more credits in CTE than students in other kinds of schools, but that it's overall translating to more credits by the end of 11th grade, meaning that P-TECH students are more on track to graduate by the end of 3 years of high school so they're closer to the total number of credits that they need to earn to graduate than students in comparison schools. And we looked at the kinds of coursework that students were engaged in that was giving them the edge over students in comparison schools. And what we found is that not only were they taking more CTE courses, they were taking different kinds of courses and the kinds of coursework that is a CTE feature of P-TECH schools. So in particular, we see students in P-TECH schools earning a lot more credits in work-based learning activities, in technology, human services, and engineering, which are all in line with the focuses or the foci of the P-TECH schools, whereas the CTE credits that were being earned in other kinds of schools were spread across other kinds of topics, including trades, career exploration, business, and that kind of thing. And the other outcome that we looked at that was interesting was the Regents exam. So as Emma described, part of the model is accelerating the high school experience for students. And in New York State, students need to pass a certain number of Regents exams in order to graduate high school. Now, there's one score, which is a 65, that students need on all Regents exams in order for that exam to qualify them for high school graduation. However, in order to be eligible to enroll in courses at CUNY, students need to pass Regents exams at a higher level. So what we see here that's interesting is that by the end of year 2, students in P-TECH are passing Regents exams at a slightly higher rate at the high school level than students in other schools, but that they're passing the ELA exam in particular at the CUNY level at much higher rates than students in comparison schools. So by the end of year 2, 42% of P-TECH students had passed the ELA Regents exam at the CUNY standard compared to just 25% of students in comparison schools. By the end of year 3, the P-TECH students have still passed the Regents exam at the CUNY level in ELA at higher levels, but the gap is starting to close with comparison students. What this tells us, though, is that by the end of year 2, more P-TECH students are at the ready to be able to enroll in CUNY classes and take advantage of dual enrollment opportunities than students in comparison schools. And so we think that P-TECH, that's in line with the P-TECH model of acceleration, where students are ready to engage in college level coursework a full year earlier than students in comparison schools. So those are our main finding from this study. To sum up, what we found is that most of the components across the schools are similar, but there is variation in implementation across schools. But we think we're seeing positive interim progress overall. So students are earning more total high school credits, putting them more on track to graduate high school than other students. They're earning CTE credits in newer, more modern types of CTE coursework, and they're being prepared earlier to take advantage of dual enrollment opportunities in CUNY than students in other schools. And importantly, these findings are for a group of students who entered high school academically low performing. So they were, as you recall, many of them were below proficient upon entering high school in 9th grade. So we think all in all, we're seeing positive interim progress, and we're looking forward to seeing what we learn through the rest of our study.